All right, I'd like to call the October 25th regular council meeting to order. I'd like to start off by recognizing and thanking Councillors Hillgartner and Bronco for their service. Councillor Hillgartner worked with us for a term and is now moved into the big leagues and heading out to Mamio Beach. Congratulations, and we wish you the best of luck with that. And Councillor Bronco worked with the City of Wetaskiwin for 3 terms, and I wish you all the best as well. And thank you so much for your service for our community, gentlemen. I don't see you guys listed on the open mic portion, but you're welcome to share some. Sincerely, thank you both very much.
All right, thank you. Thanks, guys.
Item 3, adoption of the agenda. Councillor Nielsen.
I move the City Council adopts the October 25th, 2021 regular council meeting agenda as presented.
Moved by Councillor Nielsen. Sue, go ahead.
Could administration please request an addition for the state of homelessness update from Paul Edgington?
That would move adjournment to 7. We'd have 6 with new and unfinished business. So 6A. Anything else? Ready for the question with the amendment, with the addition? Those in favor? Carried unanimously. Item 4A, approval of the minutes. Councillor Lonsdale.
I move that City Council approves regular council meeting minutes October 12th, 2021.
Moved by Councillor Lonsdale. Any errors or omissions? Ready for the question? Those in favor? Carried unanimously. Item 5A, council procedural bylaw approval.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and Council, or is it still afternoon? Normally, I would not go through the bylaws in such great detail, but considering this is part of the orientation that we had planned, I'm going to spend a little bit more time on each bylaw, making sure that the highlights are understood. Additions in each of the bylaws will be highlighted in yellow, and any moves or deletions are struck through in the agenda package. Upon review, I had spoke to you earlier about us working in more time about, into the process for longer reviews. And as I spent the time over the weekend looking at this, I did notice that there are going to be a few changes that we're going to need probably an amended motion on this in addition to whatever council questions and changes. So I will get right into it. So the first bylaw is, is council's procedural bylaw. On the first page of the bylaw in definitions, we put action list in here. This was formerly your council action task summary. That was done in a different program before, and we're going to be moving all of this into iCompass so that we have tracking for that. So when you see those, it's not CATs anymore, it's an action list. The next page of the definitions, we talk about administrative inquiries. We remove the chair because we have the presiding officer that's more formal terms through Robert's rules. We did add in a consent agenda, and of course, later in that area, I have a question as to whether or not council wants a consent agenda. So that's new to us. The other change was council committee. And so we took out under the Municipal Government Act and just put in which council members are members themselves. So it could be a board, a task force, a committee. just makes it a little bit more broad. One of the suggestions that we had when we had our municipal accountability review last year was to remove things that were in the MGA and speak more to Robert's rules or the rules that this council wants to see in the meeting. So you'll see some of those changes. We took off inaugural meeting because they're all meetings and we have them identified. Made some changes to the member, just some grammar changes and ones that would be specific to Wetaskiwin. Put in definitions around minutes, motion to defer, motion to receive, refer, and a notice of motion. So in the past, you either had to have Robert's rules with you or understand what the rules were. And so we put those into the bylaw right now to make it easier for you to access. We removed the organizational meeting. Again, it's a meeting that happens once a year and it's already identified in your bylaw, through meetings. Change pecuniary interest a little bit. With point of order and point of privilege, we only had point of order before, and there was no definition around it. And so we did add point of privilege as well. They're slightly different. So the point of order, it has to do with this bylaw or the process itself. And when you call a point of privilege, it's your personal comfort or things that are not in this bylaw. So we put those definitions in. The presiding officer is there instead of the chair. Talked about quorum, recess, recording officer, repealing bylaws, resolutions, whether they're at COW or in a regular council meeting, and then added a special council meeting. Anywhere that it has a reference to the MGA, we simply put in reference to the act. So this was done on purpose to try and get you to go to the MGA. We have ordered a new MGA for each of you, so they should be here soon. And then you can start to go there. We had previously application and interpretation, but really this is governance. And so we changed that title in section 3 with the addition of COW. We removed some things. So 3.4, talking about 2/3 vote by suspending the motion and that sort of stuff. So all of that stuff is actually included in your procedural bylaw. So we removed some of that. The resolution suspending any provision of this bylaw. So again, that's documented in the MGA, and having that in here, if anything changes in the MGA, we're kind of falling behind on that. So a lot of that stuff we put as per the MGA. So we do have in the organizational meeting, we had a definition in there. And then I did say we could consider a deputy mayor, or any variation thereof. I know you've already picked that. We would, knowing that we need an amendment to these bylaws, whatever council decides, we'll just remove the wording to make it, to stay exactly how it is. Or if you did decide to change that, we would update that. We added in COW and the frequency, and you guys have already approved those. I did add in on page 17 of 94, in an election year, to consider stopping your meetings as soon as declaration has occurred. Whether or not you want that in there, we have a few more years before there's another election. Yeah, but once it's passed, you can't after September 21st. Yeah. Yeah, so I was just saying, once the date has passed, I mean, we could be more specific with it if you want. I tried to get away from specifics just in case there were changes with, okay. Yeah, and this isn't tying you to it. It's just saying in an election year, consider that. So at the organizational meeting that happens the year prior to the election, we would highlight this and ask council to reconsider when you're looking at the schedule, canceling those council dates. We also added in that councillors have the authority to sign checks. Right now, it's the mayor. And we found a couple years ago when we were having issues that we don't expect anymore because Alan's got it all under control. But just in case something happened, it would be nice to have other people that are authorized to sign checks as well. So I added that in. And then council review all council bylaws and approve any amendments as deemed necessary, which we're doing right now and we should be doing annually with your bylaws. And then each council member will sign a code of conduct once the code of conduct is approved. And we do have a document prepared if that gets approved. We put in committee of the whole, and information that was around committee of the whole that was not in here before. Just going through the process again of adopting the agenda is all of the same thing for committees. We struck regular council meeting because we've moved that to a different part of the bylaw. In preparing for the meetings, we added in some new terms. Some of them were similar to pieces that were already in the original bylaw. But basically, we're saying that regular council meetings, including public hearings and committee of the whole, has to be received by administration by 4:30, 2 weeks prior to the meeting unless otherwise specified. And people wishing to appear in front of council as well. And then members of the public granted an audience at CAL must submit all of the information ahead of time. And so what we're trying to do is make sure as much as possible PowerPoint presentations or reports or information is put in as far ahead of time as possible. Council always has the ability to add by 2/3 vote to an agenda if you feel that the timelines are not tight enough. And then we do later in the bylaw have a section in there for late submission, right below it, late submissions. So there is an ability for us to add in emergent issues that are coming up. So that's there. And then on the next page, 20 of 94, we introduced the concept of the agenda review committee. Currently, what happens is 7 days before the meeting, the mayor, deputy mayor get an email from Karen and say, this is what we've developed as the agenda. And then the mayor, deputy mayor approve that agenda. If an agenda review committee is approved, we could potentially look at the mayor, deputy mayor being the members of the agenda review committee. And then part of that approval could be one of those meetings that we have each month for the agenda. But of course, we're open to whatever council wants in that area. And then distribution of agenda. So by pushing back all of our dates, we're really working hard to make sure that, you know, the full 3 days before the meeting, you're getting the agenda package out. Now that they're going to be starting at 9, we'll have to move that up. I guess it'll be 9 o'clock on Wednesday morning. We'll have to have the agendas out to council. And then to the public, we're saying at least 2 working days. And so that would be Thursday. We would be getting them out to the public. We put advertising for meetings in here, even though it's covered under the MGA and we have to do that. We did put it in here. And then last minute agendas, of course, through resolution, council can add anything they want under new business. I did put in a clause under special meetings, electronic meetings on page 21 of 94, that the clerk will make them available on the city's webpage as quickly as possible. So we've run into some situations sometimes where we've had to get edits to the video before we can post it. And we were a day or two getting them up, and we had some people that were pretty critical of that. And so I wanted to make sure that we had that ability in there, knowing that we might run into issues sometimes and not be able to get it up immediately. Page 23 of 94, I took out that whole part of the MGA again. That's in the MGA. We have to comply with that. So having it in our bylaws does not do anything different. Took out the section for quorum. We know what quorum is. It's identified, but then I did leave in what do we do in case we do not meet quorum, and then change the numbers in there. Commencement of meeting. So page 25 of 94. The meetings refer to all of the council meetings and committee of the whole. We added that in, and the rest was the same. And then 8.3, part of the map review last year, we had not identified a location for council meetings, and so that's in your bylaw now. We put in duties of the chair. Yeah, it's, some of the stuff was just more, we've repeated it a couple of times, and so we just streamlined it. The agenda I took out, so we've got that piece elsewhere. So late submissions was in there, delivery of agenda, we had that previously to this. And then in the order of business, the previous bylaw, so this is page 27 of 94, the previous bylaw had just a list of the order in which the agendas would be published. And in here, we put in definitions. So what each piece means and, what's included in those areas. So we've got the open mic in there. One suggestion that I did note in 11.1 BI, the first bullet, I think we should remove 4 PM. We should really be removing all times because we have the bylaw for the schedule that will set the times for COW and council. But in previous meetings where we've had to adjust the times, we advertise it and we go through the MGA process. So having it in a bylaw, it's really unnecessary. Approval of the minutes, all of this sort of stuff is just new verbiage that's been put in that wasn't there before, because again, it was just a list. On page 30 of 94, we've got the consent agenda and what that means. So again, do we want that in? Yes or no? The public hearings, again, this is just information on what happens in the public hearings, but nothing changes from what happens in there. And I did note there's 2 sections in here where we have him or her. We were really careful in the rest of the bylaw to put they, them. And so we'll have to change that one, as well as triple I on the next page where it says he, she, we will put they, them. Page 32 of 94.
Can you just with the numbers of the bylaw, not the pages, because we've got a 42 page, not a 90.
Oh,
But that's okay. Just
Okay.
keep with the numbers of what the
Okay.
bylaw is, not the page number.
okay. So we've got then on the next page, sorry, after that, there's a section for council attendance report. So we had crossed that out. We'll talk about that after we've got the other report template that I handed out previously. And then we had department reports. And so we've changed it just to staff reports for information. So typically a staff report for information could be updates from bylaw where they're just reporting on numbers, and that might be a really bad analogy because you might want to ask questions about that. Maybe it's something Kathy sends in something saying we picked up X number of tons of garbage this year. We would put that report in as information, and typically that would go in a consent agenda because we're not asking for a decision. And then if it got removed from the consent agenda, it would come back into this area and you could ask questions. And then the staff reports for decisions would be the next section. So again, that's something new where we could be giving you an update, as what's going on, but we're looking for a decision to be made. And then bylaws is in the same order, just with more definition around what that means. New and unfinished business we removed because we've got all these different sections. Again, if you want to keep new and unfinished business, we can. We'll just move a bunch of those back under that. Council schedule, attendance, committees and boards. So that's the template that we handed out. We would be looking, so previously you would get the template just for the attendance. And then Karen would put out the call and ask everyone to say, okay, here's my attendance. We're asking that we'll send this to you digitally and each of you fill it in, and then we'll tell you what the deadline is. So it's going to be what have you attended since last meeting? What boards and committees do you sit on? And what are the updates that the rest of council needs to know about? And then you can type all of that in, get it to Karen, and then we can put it into the agenda package and it gets published. Correspondence, again, we had a separate section for this, but typically correspondence would go in the consent agenda as well. If it was something that council wanted to talk about, it would get pulled back out and put in this area. We do have an in-camera next. And the reason that I put the in-camera there was because there's a lot of times where we want to speak to council in camera, about an agenda item that's coming up later. And so we try to squeeze it into cow so that we've had time to get you the information. And so if we keep it in this meeting, but putting it before the new business, then we're likely to catch all of the in-camera pieces that we need to have with council. And then new business is the last piece in there, and then adjournment. So it's just shifting a bunch of the order in which we had them. I'm trying to make it flow a little bit better, but several of those pieces would actually go into the consent agenda semi-regularly if that is approved. There was just some more stuff here in minutes in section 12. 12.2B, the names of counselors, are being presented. Of course, this is in accordance with the MGA. So we can keep that out. Sorry, it's a big bylaw, so I'll try to just keep going quickly. Most of them are just, just updates to the old wording that we had in the bylaws. Let's see if I have any more notes. Yeah, and then towards the end, like the old open microphone at 20.1, we moved back into the meeting area or the meeting section because it's actually one of the things in the agenda.
Or you skipped over 19.4, administrative inquiries made outside of council meetings. Be responded to within 2 weeks. I'm just maybe a little bit more clarification or the direction of a single member or not a direction of council, where that falls under.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah, sorry, I should have highlighted that. So in administrative inquiries, the existing bylaw that we have talks about letting the city manager know that there's an inquiry coming. And one of the things that's in here that, sorry, I should have highlighted it. It doesn't speak to how much time and effort is going to be required in some of these requests. And so it was a little bit, I'll have to look for the wording in here. It was a little bit ambiguous in the wording. So when we were thinking about this originally, I think, and I don't know what council's, when you look at an administrative inquiry, it's something that we should be able to develop or come up with in 2 hours or less. If it's going to take more than 2 hours, it starts to become a pretty big time commitment that takes us away from other things. And so I don't know if council wants to set a time. So one of the counselors comes in and says, I need information on this. We can look that up, but if it's going to be something that's going to be more than a couple of hours, then we would be requesting that it come back to council to get the approval of all of council for us to spend that time. Sorry, I should have highlighted that. Let me just find it real quick.
I can certainly.
Oh, it's 19.2C. Outside of a regular council meeting, if the response to the inquiry is of a routine nature and is not a substantive tax. So that's really ambiguous. What is routine in nature and not substantive? So if we could set a time limit or have a discussion around that, that would give us a lot more clarity. So we're not spending days or even a day trying to figure out information.
That entire thing is potentially concerning because say, even if just 4 members of council come up to you with a 2-hour, so now we've taken a day out of your week or out of administration's week that they're not working. And it's no different than you having an open door policy with council. If council takes you up on that offer, so all 7 members of council come and visit you 1 hour a week, we've now taken 1 day out of your week to get things done. So I'd rather see things in terms of inquiries from council going through an email, because we've had it in the past where members of council get into a CAO's office, talks about A, B, and C, and then it turns into these other avenues. And now we run into the risk of council having members of or a member of council having information from a CAO prior to the rest of council having it, which again is not permitted through the MGA. So I wonder how we can get away from that, where council is taking up administration's time and then looking for information when it's not a direction of council.
So this was in the original bylaw. I guess we could look at even removing all of it and just every inquiry needs to come through email. And so the way that I'm used to this is any inquiry that comes through council, they give the heads up to the city manager and then it becomes a notice of motion or something that happens at the next council meeting. So it could be an email inquiry saying, I'm going to be asking for this at the next meeting. I know in the past, we've tried to keep it a little bit less formal so that we could get things quicker. But then it opens up the door with all of this to have.
And in the past, when we tried to make it less formal, and I'd even asked for the information to be sent out to all of council, that still wasn't happening. So I think that we run the risk of members of council monopolizing administration's time, and then potentially a council directing administration inadvertently getting information for potentially all of council, but I still haven't seen, I don't think I've seen one email from council in the previous term where if a meeting had happened, this is what I went in to get information of, so that all of council had that information. So even if it's just one member of council going in to get information from administration, not all of council is getting that information, whether it's new information or just looking to reaffirm or get information that they may have missed or forgotten about beforehand. The rest of council still isn't a part of that process. And it's still one member or a couple of members of council directing administration or directing administration's time and not being a direction of all of council.
So my suggestion would be that we remove all of 19.2 or replace 19.2 with that administrative inquiries must be submitted to the CAO and all of council via email and addressed at the next meeting.
Potentially, but again, what about the time that goes into that as well? So even if it's an email from council to say, I need to know how many times there's not an ambulance within the city of Wetaskiwin. So I'm asking administration for information that all of council may or may not want. So I've sent the email, all of council knows that I've asked for this information, but now I've sent you on a mission to get information for me when it's not a direction of council.
So the way I would take that is the email comes in and we're going to be talking about it at the next council meeting and get approval from council for us
Okay.
to spend the time on that.
Okay, as
And
long as
then-
that's, yeah,
And then the other pieces that were less formal too, that falls on me as part of the MGA. If someone does come in, I have a responsibility to email all of you and let you know what that discussion was. And so I will do that. So my suggestion then is to change 19.2 and I'll do the wording for Karen. That all administrative inquiries may be submitted by council to the CAO to be addressed at the next meeting. Does that work? Okay. In the next section too, I noticed another grammar.
Councilor Elliott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a question. If I would like some clarification for today's meeting, am I allowed to ask a question of the administration just so that I can?
Clarification is different than requesting information or administration going and finding that information for you. So a clarification on an email, clarification on something coming up on the agenda, or questions that you're going to be asking during the council meeting, given administration a heads up, is absolutely encouraged.
Okay.
But that's going to all of council and administration, not you just going into the administrator's office and saying, I'm going to ask you A, B, and C on agenda items 2, 3, and 4.
Thank you.
Okay, so in the next part, 219.4, I noticed I need to change it. So we had asked previously administrative requests for 1 week. And again, we're asking for 2 weeks. So we're trying to work back the agenda and start getting more review time in. And if we could get the heads up 2 weeks. Well, I guess we would actually change that then. Administrative requires would be addressed at the next council meeting. Okay. I'll work with Karen when to reword some of that before we approve, before you approve. Okay. I think the rest of it covers it, making sure that all of council is being copied. Was there any questions about that section? Okay. And then I think that was it for the biggest changes in, the last piece was on the last page of the bylaw. The breach of conduct was removed from here because it actually violated the MGA. So when the map review was done, we removed that. And any breach of conduct would be as per the Municipal Government Act, or it's outlined in detail in your code of conduct. That is the report on that bylaw. I would be happy to take any questions.
With some of the changes or potential changes, would you look to see a first reading and then it being brought back?
Absolutely.
I would entertain the first reading and then any of the changes or potential changes to be brought back, obviously would be voted on then by council, not just direction of one member of council.
I move that city council gives first reading to council procedure bylaw 2003-21.
Moved by Councillor Billingsley. Any discussion? Councillor Nielsen.
Thank you. Through the chair, Sue, can we go back to 421, please?
Sorry, for what?
4.21. Sorry. Yes, 4.21. I gotta get through myself. I'm used to just touching my screen. Okay. Are you there already? Okay.
Page 12, if you're.
Oh, gotcha. Gotta get two fingers working on this. Anyway, late submissions. 4.21. It says that if a minute is unable to provide timely reports for the agenda items may be deferred or can be deferred. I understand the intent of that, but previously, when we were in those kinds of situations, we were provided fairly early heads up that this wasn't going to happen, and you asked for extensions on timelines and that. And this one just implies that I've interpreted that it simply implies that, hey, council, couldn't get the reports to you, so we're deferring this one for 2 weeks or 4 weeks or whatever. Can you help me understand what the intent of that is versus how I've interpreted it, please?
Yeah, through the chair to Councillor Nielsen. The late submissions, I didn't change. It was from the previous bylaw. And I guess my expectation is that that staff are following our internal process, which has a lot more time and rigor built into this, so we won't need to use this clause. There could be things that are emergent. And what we're saying then at that point is, as much as possible, get that information to us so that we can send it with your published agenda. If not, of course, council has the ability to approve additions the night of the meeting as well. So this is less about staff and their submissions and more about emergent issues that come up, like the homeless shelter
Okay.
update that we have tonight.
Okay. And on council procedures, committee of the whole 411B, it talks about hearing or receiving delegations from the public. Are we starting to duplicate, I'm going to call it open mic, at the committee of the whole level as well?
Through the chair to Councillor Nielsen, it could be. I have been in Cal meetings before where the public comes in and based on the reports that are being presented at Cal, they want to make comments to council. So it is similar to that. Very rarely though, a lot of people don't come in because there's no decisions being made. It's just information that's coming in Cal.
Okay, so it's not the intention of this document to duplicate a task that's already being done.
No, and again, if council wants to remove that, I'm totally okay with that. There's a lot of the bylaws, what I tried to do was look at who had the latest and greatest, and then we lifted from other communities that did it really well. And this was one of the communities that allowed the public to speak at Cal in case they wanted to address information that was received. But we don't have to because we have the open mic as well if you want to do that.
Thank you.
Councillor Elliott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would just like to look at the order of business 11, 11 point, and then 3. I don't have the page numbers on here. It starts off with under open microphone, and it says if a citizen wishes to address council, and then by attending their name, and then when we get down into letter number 3, it says when you are called, please register your name. And I think we need to go back to being general as opposed to specific. So when they are called, they will restate their name and just make it that way. Similarly, you must limit the presentation. The presentation will be limited to 5 minutes. I think it just needs to be more general because this is for general purposes. It's not for the person who's presenting at that time. I did send that out in an email.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Elliott. We made a note there and we will make sure that goes into the draft before final approval.
Thank you.
Anything else? We're ready for the question. Those in favor? Carried. You want first and second, and then we'll bring it back to third?
Sure.
Okay.
I move that city council give second reading to council procedural bylaw 2003-21.
Moved by Councillor Billingsley. Any discussion? All right, for the question, those in favor? Carried. And 5B, Council Code of Conduct bylaw approval.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council. The Council Code of Conduct bylaw is attached for your review. And again, I will go through it in a little bit more detail than I normally would. So in the beginning parts of the bylaw, and again, sorry, I don't have the pages here, just the bigger ones. So we'll just go by number. We did add in bias because there is a speaking to bias later in the updated bylaw. We did add in board and what that means. We did add in bullying. So this ensures that we are compliant with legislation, and you all had your OH&S orientation this morning. And so bullying is a big piece of that we also need to keep track of with council. We clarified what city staff means. elected officials and harassment. Again, that is part of legislation. And there is a lot in there with harassment that I think council needs to make sure they understand, because this is exactly what city staff have to go through as well. And we did put in the code of conduct about being, transparent, part of your transparency, both internally and among members between council and administration. We did put in a statement of values and principles, section 4. These are really just oaths that you take in more detail to make sure that you're upholding your requirements through the MGA and avoiding, bias situations, making sure that you're not coming into council meetings with your mind made up, and that you can listen to debate and not just be stuck in one position and that sort of thing. We did take out the section 5, representing the municipality. This is covered in other areas. Under section 7, respecting the decision-making process, we did, there's nothing in there. Section 8, adherence to policies and procedures and bylaws, we did add in 8.4, making sure that members are conducting themselves with appropriate decorum at all times. We did take out 9, so respectful interactions with council members, staff, and public. So this is covered in these other areas. Section 10 is conduct respecting administration. So starting to outline how we interact with each other. We took out 10.3. It's just worded a little bit differently. So the previous, 10.3.1 is really the 10.1 now. So we just tried to make those a little bit clearer. Section like 10.4, again, I know councilors and mayor have had these discussions just about more formalizing the processes of how we communicate with each other. Attendance was put in, and that's new. Confidential information, we changed the wording around it. But all of the same pieces are still there. It's just a lot more concise now. Conflicts of interest, we did remove the section member shall approach decision-making with an open mind that is capable of persuasion, because we included that in the bias section. Improper use of influence, we added in some wording at the end of 14.4. This is just related to city positions. And so other municipalities have run into this situation where a sitting councillor has applied for and been successful in a job. And so we just wanted to clarify that. Use of social media. This section, including use of city municipal assets. This is an area where I want to start the introduction of potentially having council approve cell phones for council members during the budget process. And part of this is, you need to be aware when you're on social media that you're representing the city, and be careful in how you're communicating that. So if you're communicating as an individual, we respect that right. But if you're speaking to decisions of council, upholding your code of conduct around there. And then the next piece is the municipal assets. So even the things that are posted on social media, if it has to do with city business, it becomes FOIPable. And because some of you have your own cell phones and you're using that sort of stuff, that your personal devices become open to that FOIP request. And so if someone came in and said they wanted information on something, and we know that you have emails on your personal phone, we would need to get your phone and everything on it. So it becomes a little bit of an invasion into your privacy, is my opinion. So we talk a little bit more about how you're going to use your devices that are city property, and that everything is open to FOIP. And just talking about not using it inappropriately, not obtaining financial gain by the use of city property and your position, And then any information that you receive as part of your position, you cannot benefit financially from that. So that is the city assets piece. Section 19 is new. I noticed that several municipalities are now having an annual self-assessment session. So this is just council sitting down with each other and saying, once a year, how are we doing? Are we being effective? Do we need help? There's sometimes where issues come up and we need mediation to try and get past certain things. And so just checking in with each other. Again, it's up to you guys if you want to do that or not. I added in the section of gifts. This was not explicitly outlined in the previous bylaw. And it's just common sense stuff, right? You're in elected positions and you want to make sure that it doesn't look like you're being influenced. Section 20.2, I put $100 as the limit. And you'll note when we go through the CAO bylaw review that previously mine said 300. I also lowered that to 100. So again, it's whatever number council sets and is comfortable with. In election campaigns, we removed one tiny little piece that was in there. And then we added in a whole pile of other stuff. So basically just making sure that that you're not taking advantage of your position on council when you're going through an election. And then in the formal complaint process, I added in the whistleblower policy and left a bunch of the other stuff the same. There were some pieces that were in a lot of detail. And so we just basically said, you've got the whistleblower policy, or you can come in and identify through the mayor if you're making a good faith complaint. Disputes and resolutions, we didn't change. And then compliance and enforcement. So this is another one that we had to go through and remove a bunch of things that were not compliant with the MGA, and then just refer any of the other pieces as per the legislation through to the MGA. Sorry, I think this might have been inadvertently crossed out because like a letter of reprimand is allowed. So I'll make sure that that's updated. All of these pieces in section 24.4, they are all in. And then just the yellow pieces are what we highlighted or changed. So before it used to say requesting the member to issue a letter of apology. Most of the bylaws that I looked at said that you will demand that there is a letter of apology. And then all the rest of them stay in. We did add in required reimbursement for monies received, required to return city property or reimbursement of the value, restrictions on access to city facilities, property, equipment, services, and supplies. So again, that isn't stopping you from doing your duties as on city council. Restrictions on contact with city staff, restrictions on travel and representation on behalf of council, and then restrictions on how documents are provided to the member. So we have had members in the past, not in this organization, in another organization, that were sharing confidential information. And so they then started receiving their packages with a whole pile of hidden identification markers, so that if we could tell if they shared that document, it came from them. So we added that in as well. And then vicarious liability was just something that we had in all of our bylaws, and I removed that piece. Severability stays, and then transition is to the new bylaw. So that is the proposed updates to this bylaw. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Motion for first reading, and then we can go through it. Councilor Blunts.
I move that City Council gives first reading to Council Code of Conduct Bylaw 2004-21.
Moved by Councilor Blunts. Any discussion? Councilor Elliott and then Councilor Nielsen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through to the CAO. What in 20.2, Sue, about gifts? Is it $100 per time or $100 total per year?
Through the chair to Counselor Elliott, it is per occurrence.
Okay, and secondly, I was thinking of protocol. If we happen to go to a powwow or something and received a blanket, the blanket may be worth more than $100. Some of the blankets that we've had have been $400 and $500. And it wouldn't really be
Ribbon shirts.
accepted. It wouldn't be acceptable to turn it back to them and say, no, I don't want that. So
Yeah, through the chair to Counselor Elliott, that's a really good point, and that's why I pointed out the $100. And if you want to change that, by all means, I do recognize there are cultural sensitivities, or we could add something in about cultural gifts.
well, it says as and are received as an incident of protocol. Yeah, yes, I just, we really don't want to offend somebody, and we do present gifts to them similarly, so.
Would certainly be open to any changes.
You want to make a suggestion for a change?
Well, I would say $500, but then I'm thinking if Epcor says, come on down to the Canadian Finals Rodeo, and the tickets there are $300, that might not look really good. So I'm not sure, Mr. Chair.
We could potentially break out protocol and social obligation into a separate category and not put a limit.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, even if. So gift valued at a certain dollar figure, but hospitality, protocol and social obligation, as Councillor Elliott had pointed out, if it was a ticket to an event as they're hosting the event, and then you're networking with whomever, I would worry about losing the opportunity to network over what a dollar figure was over what council can accept as an invitation. I also don't want a member of council to be on a jet on their way to Hawaii, unless I'm included. I think reporting becomes a part of it as well, that if you're comfortable with having that as a part of a report saying whomever had flew me to Hawaii for whatever, and you want to put that out there publicly, then I think that self-policing comes into effect just as much as setting a dollar figure for what a gift or a hospitality benefit would be worth. I don't know, it's very much a gray area. They can turn poor.
Just to follow up through the chair, I guess. Because I agree with the mayor, Mr. Mayor, there's a great way of doing it. There's some self-regulation of policing there, but I think there needs to be an expectation that if I am to receive a gift, whether it's to fly to Hawaii or Mexico, or I receive a blanket, I should be reporting that to somebody. I should be report that I attended this function and I was bequeathed, given, gifted, whatever. And it speaks to being transparent. And again, recognizing that our actions are accountable to the public and reported and should be reported to the public. And if I receive a $500 blanket for attending some kind of ceremony, then if questioned in the public, I can speak to that from a cultural perspective. I think it's a little tougher to say, yeah, and I got this private jet to Mexico and it's all great. I wouldn't say I wouldn't take it, but it's a little more awkward to talk about, right? Yeah. But I think it needs to be reported on.
The restrictions here were too great, so we couldn't meet here.
Through the chair to Councillor Nielsen, that does speak to maybe one of the initiatives that I started for myself last year, and council is of course welcome to do that as well. I report all my expenditures outside of the approved budget. Well, even on my credit card, everything, even within my budget, I report those on the city's website. So we could also set up a section for council.
Through the chair to Sue. Now, would this also include, like with AUMA coming up and I'm at the trade show and I put my business card in and I win an iPad, which I've never been lucky enough to do. So that's not really a gift, it's winning a contest, but does that fall into the same context?
Through the chair to Councillor Lonsdale, I think if we did update another bullet on here to move out protocol and social obligations, you're required, especially in an election year with, we've got Muni 101, you're required to go to AUMA. I think it falls down to, if we're going to have reporting for council, then can we do that? I was looking for that. So yeah, I think it goes back to setting up whatever reporting mechanism, whether it's through the template that we've said, okay, I attended this.
Right.
And then you speak to it as part of your council package, or whether we set up something online and a process where the reports come through the CAO and the mayor, and then we can put those on the website. It's up to council how you want to police that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I think there should be something in there with this discussion as far as gifts, that all gifts should be reported. Whether it's a $20, whether it's hockey tickets, whether it's a trip to Mexico. Then it's full disclosure.
Councillor Nielsen, were you able to speak to your point, or was that
No,
separate?
no, I was only speaking to what was there.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. 12.1, code of conduct, sorry.
Excuse me, could I just, point of order, could
Are
I
you not
just
done?
finish off
Oh,
related
sure.
to this discussion?
Absolutely.
We've just been given a template for council attendance and committee reports. It's got events attended. Why couldn't we just have gifts received down under this, and then it would just be part of whenever we fill it
Regular
in?
reporting. Yep.
Okay, thank you. Sorry for interrupting.
No, not at all. I apologize for trying to get past you without letting you finish.
I know that won't happen often. I'm good to go.
Yes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. 12.1 on confidentiality. I think the 12.1 speaks very specifically to matters discussed in private at a council or committee meeting until it's a matter discussed at a meeting held in public. I think that's clear. But I think when we come down to 12.2, confidential information includes information in the possession of or received in confidence by the municipality pursuant blah, blah, blah. And is generally considered to be of a confidential nature. I guess my question is, I need some clarity here, I guess, in terms of issues when we get information bulletins that come from your office, Sue, or things that haven't been discussed necessarily in open council. So if I am to receive correspondence from yourself where you are informing all of council, but it doesn't say it's not confidential, is it safe to assume then that whatever you shared with me through that email is information that I can share with the public? And so what I'm really saying is that there's a greater onus on you to inform me that what you're sending me is a confidential document. And because I don't know that RCMP reports that come to me or to us, can I now go out and share that information with my neighbor over the fence that I'm aware of an incident that's gone on and there's been a death or whatever? Like, if you're asking me to keep stuff in confidence, then I have to know what information you're asking me to keep in confidence. Like going in camera and all that kind of stuff, it's pretty clear cut.
Yeah, through the chair to Councillor Nielsen. When I send updates to council, you're free to share any of that information, and I 99% of the time, have made sure that I put confidential in the reline, and or at the very least, I mark it confidential in the email, so it will show up with a usually there's an exclamation mark or a confidential mark on it. I was even going to go as far as to try and encrypt it so that you couldn't even forward it if it was information, but I needed Corey to help me with that. So I will always identify that the information I'm sharing is confidential, or if it's a CAO update and only one piece is confidential, I will highlight that piece to say this piece is confidential.
Thank you.
And I try to do the same as well, especially when I'm getting information to share with council. And I would hope that the rest of council would, if they've received that confidential information, that they're very clear that that's exactly what it is.
Okay, thank you. 23, item 23, dispute resolution. 23.2. And I know this would never happen, but just in case it does. It indicates that in this document that if members of council can't resolve the dispute, then the dispute shall be submitted to the mayor for resolution. If I take that one step further, if I happen to be in conflict with the mayor and we have that difficulty and we can't resolve it, where does it get resolved at?
Just bring it to the mayor, he'll resolve it.
Through the
Oh,
chair.
okay, that's good. Let's move on. Yeah.
Through the
So, I think it's important
Yeah.
that we understand that we've covered all the bases going forward here.
Yeah, through the chair to Councilor Nielsen, typically it's the deputy mayor that would be addressing that. And if the deputy mayor is the one that has the issue, it would be the next in line for deputy mayor or the previous one, but we could put that in there as a clarification or a point of this is the process to follow.
But so to that, instead of the mayor picking sides, can this not go through our whistleblower and have an outside, like have somebody else with the resolution as opposed to a member of council? I think it leaves room for the opportunity to put the mayor, the deputy mayor, or the former deputy mayor in a bad position to be finding a resolution for members of council that they need to be working with for till the end of the term. So I would not like that to be a resolution of the mayor or whatever that chain of command follows.
Okay, through the chair and all of council, I think the next best solution then is not the whistleblower because they kick that back to us and or you to deal with. We do have a process for outside investigators and we have a couple of consultants that we typically use. We also have the same process for mediation. So we could start with mediation. And if it's still not working, we could move into one of those consulting firms that come in and does actual dispute resolution.
And you're suggesting that would apply to all disputes that can't be resolved.
Correct.
That they're not coming to you, they'd be going to a third party.
Please.
Okay.
Yeah.
May I continue? 24.4 on sanctions. Again, I guess I'm a 24.4.9. There we go. Reduction or suspension of a remuneration as defined in the Act according to a reduction in duties, excluding allowances for attendance at council meetings. And I'm not aware that we receive remuneration for council meetings.
Through the chair to Councilor Nielsen. So this, and I could remove this, I think this is meant in the Act for councils that they don't have a set salary. It's based on what they attend. So we could remove that piece.
Yeah, I'd like to see it removed because I think there's oftentimes a misconception in the public that we're putting in per diems and all the rest of it for attending meetings, which is not the case at all.
I think just a clarification, the wording saying that you won't have a reduction in pay because council is paid by salary. So you can't be hindered in your role as council. You're still attending meetings. You still receive your monthly salary, whatever that sanction might cover, but any of the additional boards or committees that you sit on that you're able to submit for per diems would be excluded if that was part of the sanction. So just having a clarification between not receiving the per diem or the remuneration for boards or committees, but keeping your monthly salary as per the MGA, because you can't reduce the member of council's pay.
I'll update that.
That's good for me. Thank you.
Councilor Billingsley. You're good? We'll bring you to page 11 for 10.4 and 10.5. 10.4 is more just a highlight. Members of council obtaining information about the operation or administration of the city from the CAO or person designated by the CAO, not getting it through staff. So I'll take it one step further in that if you are in conversation with a city employee and your conversation goes more than how are you or how's the family or whatever the personal side of it is, you are now in contravention or breaching this code of conduct, and any information you need from a member of staff comes through our CAO. And 10.5, contact staff according to the procedures authorized by the CAO. Is there a place where it says how the CAO is authorizing interactions of council and staff?
Through the chair, the only area would be in the CAO bylaw where it's designated the general managers as deputy CAOs, and they have all the rights and remedies as per the MGA as I do. So I think in that situation, and again, this is up to council, contacting one of those three is appropriate so long as I'm also included on that.
Okay. And all of council.
Yes.
Okay.
What was the last comment?
And all of council. So not an email to the CAO and an SLT, but collectively. And page 15. Oh, no, that was covered. Yeah, I'm good. Motion for first reading has been made. If there's nothing further, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Carried. I'll look for second and then we can bring it back.
I move that city council gives second reading to the council. No, hold on. Sorry. Oh my God. I just did something weird. It's not a touch screen anymore. I move that city council gives second reading to the council code of conduct bylaw 2004-21.
Moved by Councilor Blatz. Anything further? Ready for the question? Those in favor? Carried. Thank you. 5C, council boards and committees bylaw approval.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and council. This bylaw was relatively new last year, and so there are not a lot of amendments that administration is suggesting within it, except for Schedule A. We did create a list of the boards and committees that were on the previous one that was already looked at, but we've also added in other ones like the Winter Shelter Advisory Board. We've got the Agenda Review Committee in here and those sorts of things. So any of those changes that were previously discussed, we will make sure are added into this bylaw. But one of the things that I would like, I should have made this a motion ahead of time. I did give it to Karen, is we would be looking for council to direct administration to develop terms of reference for each of the approved boards and committees. And so part of this bylaw says you don't sit on a board or committee unless there is a terms of reference and we understand exactly what we're being asked to do. I know some of them, like, the joint Camrose City one or Cape and things like that. The mayor's ones, there might not be, so we could potentially break them into two areas where there are standard ones that the mayor attends, where there is no terms of reference. But I think for the bulk of them, we should make sure we have a terms of reference as per the bylaw, so that all of council knows what's expected of the members that are sitting on those committees. So I would be open to any questions.
We'll move first reading and then we can have the additions.
I move that city council gives first reading to the council boards and committee bylaw 2005-21.
Moved by Counselor Lonsdale. Any discussion? Counselor Nixon.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through the chair to Sue. So in your just most recent comments about terms of reference as it relates to committees, you mentioned that, well, there's some that should perhaps not have to have them and others that should. So can we be clear on what should versus what should not? And I guess I'm looking at some of these committees that we've recently seen a need to establish or wanted to see established. And as an example, I'd give Camrose Wetaskiwin relationship committee that we talked about previously. Because regardless of whether some are less formal than others, shouldn't there be a goal established, at least as part of the terms of references, to why we think that committee is necessary and worth pursuing? So, for example, our relationship with Muscat Cheese, and I know Mr. Mayor has met numerous times, but we haven't really formalized a committee as such. In order to have terms of reference, you have to have agreement at the other end that they're interested in actually having that kind of a committee as well. So I think there's a way that by having a terms of reference in the statement of goals and intentions, it formalizes the process. And I think we've got some committees that we should formalize the process. So I'd be concerned that we don't have committees that don't have a term of reference. They all should have, to me, a goal or an objective in them that's clearly stated. So I'd rather not see any that doesn't have that kind of a statement.
And even if it's not our committee, like if it's the mid-city mayors or the Northern Alberta mayors and Reeves, if they don't have a terms of reference, we can establish our own and what our expectations are of the person who sits on that committee or board.
Yep.
Brings back to council.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't have a problem with that. Just so long as, again, the public understands why the mayor is going off to these meetings, or why Nielsen's flying to Hawaii for a meeting, but I think, again, one of the criticisms that we have of council is that we are not always transparent. And I think if we're going to be spending city resources and or time, we need to let our public know that we have these committees and why we have them and why they're important. End of soapbox.
Councilor Elliott.
We're just playing ping pong, you and I, Councillor Nielsen, taking turns talking. Just city council, Mr. Mayor, is the police commission, is it not? Or is it?
For the actual RCMP, we're the police commission.
Yes.
So
Through the chair to Councillor Elliott. No, the agreement that we have with the RCMP states, and I'm hoping to change this, by the way, it states that they report through to the city through the mayor. My goal is that they actually report through administration, like any other outside agency would. So the agreement currently as it sits, there is no commission. They just report through to Tyler.
So while we're sitting here talking about different boards and committees, would this be something that the city might look at? And I'm looking to the mayor or the CAO to share this, but we don't seem to have any control over the RCMP. Yet we are paying $3 million or something a year, and we have no control. And Edmonton has a police commission. Most communities have a police commission to oversee their police force.
Through the mayor to Councillor Elliott, one of the committees that is not on here is the Community Safety and Wellbeing Committee. Is that the name, Paul? And so that is an avenue that we could use for that. The other thing is we have an expectation that we've discussed with the inspector this year, that he is bringing back and allowing council the opportunity to have input into his annual plan. So if those two are not enough, then, you know, obviously the will of council, we could develop another terms of reference if that's desired.
We do report, or we do have that conversation with the RCMP on the policing priorities. So it is a mix between his open houses or communication with the community, his interaction and communication with council, and direction from K Division as well. So we do have say in what the RCMP is doing in terms of their priorities.
In my experience, Mr. Mayor, the city council has rubber stamped it, and that's basically all that's done.
No, we've had the ability to go through the policing priority.
Agreed, but it's been basically rubber stamped. At least in my experience. And my feeling is very strong that we should have more control over the RCMP. It's what, 16–18% of our budget. And I really think we should be able to provide more direction for the RCMP than we are doing right now. Thank you.
You can, if you'd like, propose a police commission for a committee to be added to. If you'd like a police commission, you could make that request.
Could that not, pardon me, could that not be part of strat planning? That kind of a suggestion come up for discussion at the strat planning meeting?
Could also be that, yeah.
I'm comfortable with that. Thank you.
Councilor Billingsley.
So if that's the case, it could still be added to the Schedule A later on. That's not if indeed it's the will to strat planning. Someone then after the strat planning, a motion would have to be brought forward. Is that correct?
Present a notice of motion saying that this is what you'd like to have been brought back to the bylaw, and add that. Councilor Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Now, we haven't seen any of these that I'm aware of, but if we were to set up subcommittees to look at a particular issue of council, where we set aside 2 or 3 people to look into something or provide some information back to council or whatever.
Are you speaking generally? Like, we have an issue, we're going to have 2 or 3 members of council look after that as directed by council.
Yes.
Okay.
So would an ad hoc committee or a subcommittee fall under this kind of a schedule?
I don't think so. I think that would just be a direction of council. I don't think you would formalize, because that committee could or would change depending on the issue potentially.
Okay, thank you.
So I think that under the direction of council, you could say, we'll appoint councillors A, B, and C to work on this issue.
Okay, I'm good, thank you.
Anything else? We're ready for the question. Those in favor? Carried. For second reading, and then it can be brought back.
So we're on the second reading. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, please.
I move the city council give second reading to the council boards and committees bylaw 2005-21.
Moved by Councilor Nielsen. Anything further? Ready for the question? Those in favor? Carried. Item 5, the city manager bylaw. Yeah, sorry, I thought that was. Yes. There was no one opposed to having terms of reference for the committees? Again, I will entertain first reading. We can have discussion.
I move the city council gives first reading to city manager bylaw 2006-21.
Moved by Councilor Nielsen. Any discussion?
There's no presentation to this.
I didn't really make a lot of changes
I was
to
gonna
this
say
one.
It wasn't highlighted very much, so I.
Yeah, so I could go through it really quickly. Section, sorry. Powers and duties, number 6, G. Alan is more comfortable with us bringing forward a bylaw each year annually instead of the CAO just carrying forward the budget to the approval. So that was one change that was in there. The one other addition was section 11, and I need to reword it already as I read it for over the weekend. I realized it did not make sense. So this one came, quite often we get requests for use of a facility or a park or something that's really nominal. And I don't have the authority to give approval to nonprofits, not-for-profits, and designated charities to use city facilities. I'll use Diamond Jubilee Park as a good example. There's a $50 fee that's attached to it. And those people would be required to come to council and get approval for that. And so what I'm looking to do is just streamline some of the requests that Paul's team gets for requests of a park use or a boardroom in one of the facilities under $250 that it be approved through the CAO. Of course, that dollar number can change to whatever council wants, or if they even want it in there. And then in Code of Conduct, Section 21I, I changed the $300 down to $100. And I already do report all of my stuff online. So yeah, those were the changes for the bylaw. Of course, I'd be open to any other suggestions that council has.
Councilor Nielsen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through the chair to Sue. So has item 8H always been there?
Through the chair to Councilor Nielsen. So this bylaw was only brought in 2020, last year after I took the position. And so it's all relatively new, but it was there in the previous bylaw. Yes.
Okay. I've got concerns with, maybe it's just the wording of 8H. Where once the budget has been approved by council, the city manager has the ability to transfer funds between departments or between budgeted projects. Now, it also talks about within approved budget limits. And I guess I've got concern there because it doesn't clearly identify the limits unless they're obviously somewhere else, but they're not part of this scheduled documentation. There's no timeline to report back to council that I've moved X number of dollars from A to B to C to D, whatever. And I'm also concerned about transferring dollars between departments. Especially in light of some of the conversations we've had recently in terms of trying to keep track of our financial positions. And I also wonder if it doesn't take some responsibility off the departments to prepare I'm sorry, I'm lacking words without being offensive. Better budget proposals. Because then we can just move money to offset any hiccup along the way. And I'm not suggesting that, I'm not trying to trivialize this by calling it a hiccup. I guess we've got some financial reporting problems. We've got movement of money from department to department with certain limits. We don't have identification of timeline by which we'll be informed that the money's moving. The limits are not part of this document, and I think they should be if we're going to have them in place. And I worry that council has been given the responsibility to oversee or to set the budget, administration to exercise the deployment of those resources. And if we're setting the budget based on priorities of council, then I think council should be informed about the need to move the monies to meet council's goals and objectives. So I have real concerns with this as it's written. And I think it needs, for me personally, I think it needs to be redrafted to address some of those concerns if other councillors have those concerns.
Through the chair to Councillor Nielsen, I should have probably pointed out that all of the powers and duties are right from the MGA. So council, this is the minimum that the CAO has the authority to do as per the MGA. Of course, if council wants to make that more stringent, you can, but this is the wording from the MGA, and it's always been in our bylaws. It's been in our tendering and, our purchasing bylaw as well. So the theory is once council, so administration brings budget to council, we tell you exactly what we need for what. Council approves it, then it is my responsibility to make sure that that is spent that way. Once our internal purchasing policy states, once the budget is approved, I can move throughout so long as it is for the same purpose. Like I can't take contracted services and go do pothole repairs, but I could move contracted services in CPS to contracted services and municipal services. And then each of the general managers from our internal policy is responsible for their budgets in their divisions. They have the authority to move within their division to make their business unit work. And then we're still accountable to report back to council if, we're nowhere near going over budget in some of those areas from a division perspective. So if council wants more rigor around what we're doing and why we're doing it and reporting back, then I would suggest we can add that in. But I would just caution that once the budget is approved, we should have some control to be able to manage those budgets.
May I comment? And I don't disagree with you at all, Sue. And I think for me, I think the wordiness is clunky. Now, it may line up with the MGA, but I understand the flexibility for administration being able to make decisions to operate the city. What I worry about, and maybe this is an Allen problem down the road, but if a department puts a budget in for $100,000 and they only spend 50 of it, to me, that 50,000 I would see as potential surplus, but it could also be moved over to another department that wasn't as rigorous in establishing their budget lines, and they didn't put in enough money. But now Sue can come in on her white steed and gallop in and save the day. And at the end of the day, we know the budget has been balanced. But in actual fact, the department that received that extra $50,000 is over budget by $50,000, but their books wouldn't necessarily reflect it if we transferred money into it. So I never get a true picture that Department A is over budget, because it's always being covered off in some way, shape, or form. And to me, that's a bit of a financial worry. And again, maybe the financial gurus have solutions for all of that, and you're grinning over there, so I suspect he does.
Through the mayor to council. Oh, there we go. I can say in most municipalities, what happens sometimes is that they move funds or they steal funds from one place to pay for another. The problem that some do is that they then put it in to the originating budget, I guess, cost center, as opposed to reflecting where it should have went. And that's what we're doing right now. Both the manager of finance and myself is we're telling staff is no, don't code it to, over there because you got extra money to code it over there. Code it where it belongs so that we can do a proper budget and we can evaluate how things are done. So I understand your concern. The intent is that we hope that this doesn't happen. I know it's happened here before. We've had staff members, they see this extra money in the budget, so we're just going to move it over there within their area that they're responsible for, as opposed to putting it where it belongs. So when it comes to moving money around in that, Ms. Howard, or I think we both think alike in the sense that I would never use contract services to pay for salaries. I would use salaries to pay for contract services because we have to fill a position real quick when we can. Once you do take a contract service and put it into a salary, now you've created a commitment, a lot stringent. So, and it also in regards to capital assets, that's a no-no. You have a capital asset. If you're going to go over budget, it's generally speaking, you take it to council and say, hey, look, this is what it is. We have this project over there where we can save some money, but we need to get this done. So to be quite honest, there's a lot of trust. But if over the how many years, 25 years that I've been doing this in local government, when you start squeezing that belt in regards to trying to get things operated, it's a little more difficult to do that. I understand why council is doing it, because I think you've heard my concerns, but we're working right now to alleviate those concerns and to be on top of it. But council can make that decision.
Through the chair, Talon, at the end of a year, can you push a magic button that prints out all the transfers that have taken place, that shows X number of thousands of dollars has been, it may be retained in its original budget line, but it's paying out somewhere else or covering the cost somewhere else? So we could actually see what kind of transfers are administrative transfers are taking place. I'm not talking about transfers that normally get made. So that, I mean, if we had hypothetically 1,500 transfers in the course of a year by Sue, I'd say, wow, that seems like an awful lot of money being moved around in the books. If we have 4 or 5, that's a different story. But right now, as a person looking at our financial picture, I don't have a clue what kind of track record we have in that kind of discussion.
Is there a magic button? No, there's not a magic button per se.
Can you make one?
Uh, It's a process. And where the thing is, basically what I do, and I believe Ms. Howard also has done this because of her engineering
Mhm.
experience, and engineers want to be accountants. I'll be enough. For my little comment is that she keeps track of everything that, when she's moving things around. So it's something that we keep track of. It's something that I believe Ms. Howard has indicated that when she needs to move something around, she informs council, after the fact. But again, it's that severity of the amount. We're not talking hundreds of thousands of dollars kind of a deal. We're talking maybe $10,000 here and there, and looking at it across the board. But yes, there can be put in place a process where we can identify for council on where money has been utilized from one cost center or one department to another. And there's different rules on how you look at it. I look at, we have 3 divisions. The number of departments is debatable as to how many departments we should have. But you could argue that we have probably 20 departments. And then within each of those departments, there's cost centers. So within each department, within a cost center, you can move funds around. And again, the idea is to avoid using contract services or to hire staff, because that's really a no-no in the long-term vision. In regards to within a department, the manager of the department would look at his budget and say, okay, I need to get this done in Department A, and I got money in Department B. Miss GM, can I do that? Right, and so that discussion is held between the GM and the managers. And generally speaking, Sue is pulled into it, and I am, and that's how I hope. And then we have an idea of what's going on, so we can keep track of it. And I know the 2 to my left are very conscious in regards to moving forward and trying to get things better set up so that they can understand where the money is being spent. That's what we're working towards. We're getting a lot closer to it, and I believe we have a team in place with some additional staffing that is going to allow us to do that and keep everybody on their toes. But yes, no magic button, but we can get something in place that we can present to council at the end of the year as part of an audit report that is from a staff, not just the auditor. I don't know what's been done in the past. I know in my past experience is that you get the auditor's report, and then you have as the GM of corporate services or the CFO, I would do a report explaining all the differences within materiality of what happened, and so give a council a better understanding than reading a 10-page document, which is confusing to say the least since they've changed the format. That allows council to get a better idea of what has happened. I hope that answers your question.
I think part of what's been missing to Councillor Nielsen is we haven't been doing financial reporting to council. And so I think that was always our opportunity to come forward and say, hey, I've gone over in this area and here's why, but my department's going to balance at the end of the year. We are in the process also of updating our internal purchasing policies and making sure that there are controls in place and everybody knows what they're allowed to do when. And so we're working on all of that stuff. And Alan and his team assure me that in 2022, we are going to be starting regular. We had strived for quarterly reporting to council on our budget. And so we would be having those conversations at that point. And then any policies that we're updating, of course, I would send those to council. as information that new directives have been updated and this is what staff are expected to do related to budget. So I feel like part of this is missing because we haven't been talking to you about it, but normally we would.
Thank you.
Councilor Billingsley.
So could we add, something to the effect of that all transfers be reported during monthly financial updates or something to that effect? Like, so that it's at least there that you have to, or it has to be reported to us, whatever works as far as when and what timeline would work. But then it has to be declared.
It could, I'm not that person, but I just want to throw this out here for you to, that what happens in a situation when I tell you that I've made a decision to move 5,000 from this account to that account and you disagree with it? Then is council becoming the keeper of the budget? You know, we need to make sure that we have opportunities to have those discussions, I guess, and that we're not having to bring back every $5,000 that we want to change from here to there or, you know, to council for
No, I
approval.
would say that reporting is different than giving direction.
Okay.
So under this bylaw, it says that you have that authority. Council is just being
On
updated
the
on what's
report, okay.
happening. They're not giving direction on how you're doing it.
Perfect.
If they have a problem with what the policy or the bylaw says, then they need to make a change to the bylaw, not on what happens when you report it.
Perfect.
Yeah, I'm not wanting for us to give you permission. It's just, I'm looking. Yes.
Yeah, we can add that.
Mhm.
So Sue, sorry, through the chair. So Sue, if I wanted to see, just for my own curiosity, what those limits are, where would I find them?
So the limits on purchasing,
Yeah.
Those are our
No,
internal.
limits upon your ability to transfer. Because it says based on approved budget limits provided.
so it's, once you approve the budget, I have the right to move any of it.
Oh,
There is
okay,
no
okay,
limit.
so there's not set limits by category.
No.
Okay.
No,
then I
it's
missed-
the budget in its entirety, but our internal directives have more stringent requirements on who can do what, where. I
okay,
think
missed-
Alan has more to add.
I misread that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Alan, did you have something to add to that piece?
If I may, through the mayor to council. Coming as part of the 2022 budget is a product out of Questica called Open Book. What that will allow is for council and the public to see at any particular time where the money has been spent within the city. What we need to do is to make sure that everything is properly coded such that the numbers make sense. That's what we're moving to. So it'll be a drill down, it'll be by division, by department, and then by cost center, and then it'll be drilled down into cost categories as opposed to individual line items. So the wages will be one whole lump sum of wages and down the road in relationship in comparison to the budget. What that also, a component of that is also in regards to capital projects. So there will be a request to add this onto our budgeting software where council can look at any time. And it will be, moving forward. Yes, so I just wanted to let everyone know that we're trying to be as transparent as we can, but we're trying to get into a position where the numbers make sense or coded properly in regards to where the budget is. So we're trying to work on that right now to make sure everything's in line.
Anything else? Ready for the question? Those in favor? I'll entertain second reading and we will have it brought back.
I move that city council give a second reading to the city manager bylaw 2006-21.
Moved by Council Nielsen. Anything further? Ready for the question? Those in favor? Added agenda item 6A, State of Homeless Update by Paul Edginton.
Good evening, council. Before I begin, I'd like to introduce partners of ours from the Maskwacis Cree Tribal Council. On October 15th, the Maskwacis Cree Tribal Council was directed by the Four Nation Chiefs of Maskwacis to be an official point of contact on the homelessness issue we are experiencing in Wetaskiwin. Our administration met with the Maskwacis Cree Tribal Council on October 20th to start building a relationship, discuss current challenges and long-term vision in addressing complex social issues within the region. I've asked both Christina Aguilar Sanchez and Jerry Saddleback from the Maskwacis Cree Tribal Council here this evening to introduce themselves to you folks, get a better sense of the reasons for why this partnership was identified, and maybe discuss a little bit more about their role moving forward with the city of Wetaskiwin. So Christina, I think you're on the call. I just hand the microphone over to you.
Thank you, Paul. I want to thank Paul and Ren for inviting us to the table. My name is Christina Aguilar Sanchez, and I'm one of two technicians at the Maskwacis Cree Tribal Council. We are the administrative officers. We report to a board of directors, which includes leadership from the Maskwacis Cree Nations. So that includes the Four Nation Chiefs, as well as two representatives from each First Nation. So on October 15th, Chief Vernon Saddleback had recommended that MCTC be a point of contact on this complex issue. So Paul and I and Ren and Jerry will be meeting weekly on Wednesdays to discuss this and how we can come together and find solutions on this complex issue.
Thank you, Christina. Maybe before I get in the rest of my presentation, and just while we have Christina and Jerry on the line, does council have any questions, I guess, for the Maskwacis Cree Tribal Council, just in regards to their role? Okay. Thank you, Christina. Thank you, Jerry, for your time this evening. Okay. I have an update for you today on October 25th, and it's quite a lengthy update in that I'm going to provide the timeline of everything administration has worked on since council made a motion on September 13th to direct administration to set up a fenced encampment on 37th A Avenue. And I won't read the full motion, but to get started in developing a winter homeless shelter. The entire motion is dependent on funding allocations being awarded to the city and or Wetaskiwin FCSS, and I have an update on some grant funding that we've been pursuing. For grant and lobbying efforts, and in partnership with Wetaskiwin FCSS, we submitted we co-bid on a grant application as part of the Reaching Home funding through the Rural Development Network. So Reaching Home funding is federal funding, and the Alberta Rural Development Network here are the ones that are responsible for allocating that on behalf of municipalities in rural Alberta. In addition to the Wetaskiwin FCSS City of Wetaskiwin RDN grant, administration also understood that the mayor's office was actively lobbying various ministers for funding support the project. To date, our administration or Wetaskiwin FCSS hasn't received any direct funding from any of those efforts, we believe, but I do have more of an update here as we get going. So administration is aware of a further potential grant funding in partnership with the Maskwacis Cree Tribal Council to support trailer encampment, and that would have to be in partnership with the MCTC, something we discussed last week and something we'll continue to discuss moving forward. Related to supporting our vulnerable population, but not directly to an improved homeless shelter, our administration has received funding for 2 term employees that will support the work of both the city and Wetaskiwin FCSS in supporting stakeholder engagement and the committee work we're involved in, as well as helping Wetaskiwin's vulnerable population navigate supports that are available within the community. Both these positions are granted on term to the end of March 2022. It is the intent of our administration to have these staff reside within Wetaskiwin FCSS, and those discussions are ongoing with their board. So on maybe I'll just jump straight to the good news on the grant funding. So it's twofold. Last week, administration became aware that an agreement between the government of Alberta and a shelter provider in Alberta, the Edmonton Mustard Seed, had been reached, which would see the Mustard Seed operate an overnight winter shelter in Wetaskiwin with a maximum of 20 beds. So just to clarify, that's an overnight winter shelter in Wetaskiwin with a maximum of 20 beds. This deal is tentative based on the city providing location. As per the government of Alberta, providing a suitable location that is adequately zoned for shelter use is the responsibility of the municipality. And once a suitable location has been identified and is ready for operations, the Edmonton Mustard Seed would start to operate a shelter in Wetaskiwin. And again, that's a deal that has been reached between the GOA and the Edmonton Mustard Seed. Another way of putting it is the government of Alberta would be funding the operations of the shelter provider in the city of Wetaskiwin if an appropriate location could be found. And last Friday at 11 a.m., which was pretty recent, administration learned that we would be receiving $150,000 in capital funding from the Reaching Homes grant to assist with building a trailer encampment as described in council's motion on September 13th. The funding will assist in getting the utilities and site developed, as well as the purchase and arrangement for the trailers and fencing to be brought to site. RDN has also identified additional funding that we can apply for once the site has been chosen. We have been given direction by council to proceed, but they wanted formal direction that the land that we are pursuing is going to be developed on before we start to pursue that. In addition to, and maybe going back a little bit, after September 13th, administration in partnership with Wetaskiwin FCSS did reach out to the Edmonton Mustard Seed. As well, the government of Alberta put us in touch with the Calgary Drop-In Center. At that time, it was to inquire about their capacity and ability to provide the supports to council's original motion above. That is the security, cultural sensitivity training, first aid training, Narcan training, and cleaning services. Both agencies are very interested in supporting our community. To note, the Calgary Drop-In Center is the largest homeless provider in Canada. The Calgary Drop-In Center unfortunately does not have capacity to operate a winter emergency encampment, but they are interested in supporting through their expertise and wisdom on the Guiding Coalition of Homelessness, and will do so as an advisor. The Edmonton Mustard Seed, as I've noted, has capacity and ability, but requires funding. And last week we learned that the government had found some money that was going to be able to make that possible, assuming we can find a location and get a location moving. I just want to note that at one point in time, administration wasn't aware that any agency was going to be able to help out here. And so we did go ahead and do some research on what happens if all we had was a private security company. So for whatever reason, if we were unable to find an appropriate agency, an estimated budget to provide private security 24/7 a day would have been approximately $25,000 a month. This budget wouldn't include the required training required to provide the cultural sensitivity, first aid training, Narcan, and cleaning services. These additional aspects of the motion would need to be further researched out before we could pursue those. For in-kind donations in regards to the September 13th motion, administration and Wetaskiwin SCSS, as well as our friends in economic development, have been in contact with ATCO and TELUS to inquire about in-kind supports. FCSS had submitted a letter to ATCO requesting the donation of an encampment to support a winter emergency shelter. And speaking with both the Calgary Drop-In Center and the Edmonton Mustard Seed, we learned a lot about how to arrange trailers to ensure that we were able to operate them with a minimal number of staff. And what we learned is things like having a lot of bedrooms in there is really bad if you're trying to run a shelter, because then you need more staff to ensure that everybody is safe within the trailer encampment. Administration has reached out recently, both to ATCO and TELUS, to gain further understanding of the likelihood of an in-kind donation, and we will continue to do so until we hear back from those folks. On the September 27th, administration has requested clarification on the original motion, and it was at that date that council approved a motion to create a winter shelter advisory committee. Just so council is aware, that group has met 2 meetings since its inception. It would have been more, but we were asked to hold off on some of those meetings because of the negotiations that were ongoing between the GOA and the Edmonton Mustard Seed. And so those meetings moving forward will be critical to ensure oversight and transparency of what's going on, the work of the shelter, and to ensure that council has a lot more of a line of sight between this body and the shelter provider. As well, a lot of the members that sit on the Winter Shelter Advisory Committee have been selected for their subject matter expertise in shelters, policing, and medical supports. Okay, so moving forward, we've provided 2 motions just to get a sense of what council is comfortable doing here this evening. And Karen, I don't know if you can put those on the screen. Thank you. So of course, the motion approved by council on September 13th is dependent on receipt of grant funding. To date, and Friday at 11 a.m., we found out that we had been awarded $150,000 in grant funding for capital expenditure. We have not yet received the funding, but as of me sitting here this evening, I have received a letter of commitment from the RDN as of 6 o'clock this evening. So administration has is requesting further direction from council. Got the 2 motions there. So no, it's our screens are blank actually up here. But I actually got it on my computer. Just stay tuned. Sorry. Oh, my computer is not working. Oh, it is now. Hang on one sec.
It's been a hard day on technology for everyone.
Okay, so the first motion, these motions, oh, sorry, they're independent of one another. So if you make a decision on number 1, you wouldn't make a decision on number 2 and vice versa. So administration is wondering as to what council is comfortable doing. So the first motion speaks to front-ending the development of a fenced trailer encampment on 37th A Avenue on the road allowance. That is what the September 13th council motion speaks to. Using the $150,000 that's been granted from the Rural Development Network upon receipt of that letter of commitment. And when I wrote the motion, we did not have a letter of commitment. And since I've written it and you've seen it, that letter of commitment has been received. Number 2 is to direct administration to proceed with the development of a fenced trailer encampment in the same location, not to exceed $300,000 and that be funded from contingency reserve. This would see administration proceed with the development of an encampment right away and endeavor to recover the outstanding dollars through various government grants. The reason number 2 is on the table is because today is October 25th. In speaking with Kathy Lewin, we have spoken about the ability to start getting utilities in the ground. That would have to happen sooner rather than later. However, every day we wait for more grants or for things to be provided in kind is another day that a shelter is not open in the city of Wetaskiwin. So I put number 2 there for you folks to consider, understanding that we do know that there is additional grant funding through RDN, that we do know that there is additional grant funding, perhaps through the Massachusetts Cree Tribal Council, and understanding that some of the good lobbying that the mayor has done that might come to additional fruition through additional funds to the government of Alberta. So I will leave that now for council's consideration and take any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through the chair to Paul. So Paul, between the $150,000 that's you received a letter on from the Rural Development Funding Group and the extra $150,000 that would be requested from motion number 2, does that cover the full extent of the operation of an encampment for this winter? Or are there other costs currently identified that are unsupported? And or are there other costs that could potentially require supporting?
Yeah, through the mayor to Councillor Nelson. So the $300,000 has been a number that we've administration has researched and identified back in February, and that it would be about $150,000 to put in the utilities and servicing, and another $150,000 to purchase trailers and move them to site. Going back to the motion on September 13th, things like the private security and the fence was not specific to that $300,000. However, since we identified that $300,000 back in February, March, we do know that originally that estimated like a 50 room or 50-person trailer. What the government of Alberta is willing to fund here is only for 20 mats, which reduces the amount of trailer that we need. As we move into this, I'm sure that there will always be opportunities to spend more, but given where we're at right now, $300,000 would be allow us to go out, put in the utilities right away, start pursuing trailers immediately, finding appropriate trailers. The most appropriate ones are the ones that are completely open without rooms. So it would be worth the effort of this administration to look around for those, because then it reduces the operating costs for government of Alberta. And so what the $300,000 allows us to do is to go out for those two specific things right away. As we get into it, and speaking with Kathy, regardless of which motion was approved, if a motion was approved, we will be putting a project team together with our funders. So that would be the Government of Alberta, RDN, as well as both Kathy's staff, my staff, and perhaps the mustard seed to better understand a little bit about the business requirements to operate a winter overnight shelter from that location. And so as we get into this, undoubtedly we will learn more, but the bulk of the costs I don't believe will exceed 300,000. And as we get into it, I think what we'll note is that there might be opportunities to save some money. But we don't know that right now, because at this point in time, we just received $150,000 on Friday in the grant funding. We haven't actually started getting into the logistical planning piece of this, because we had no funding up until Friday at 11 a.m.
And so the negotiations that took place between the GOA and Mustard Seed are incorporated in this 300,000?
So through the mayor to Councillor Nielsen, the negotiations between the GOA and the Mustard Seed administration was not privy to. We've essentially introduced both agencies, and they knew GOA was very well aware, as well as AHS, of the need here. So the government of Alberta has told us that the government is acknowledging that we absolutely need an emergency shelter in Wetaskiwin, and that they have gone out and found a shelter provider with capacity. That's the Edmonton Mustard Seed, which we helped identify as well. But that funding that money for operating is completely separate from this. The $300,000 that we would be asking for, if you were to go with motion 2, is for the capital. It's for the building of the encampment itself. And so back to what the GOA told us last week, is that it's the municipality's responsibility to find a suitable location that is zoned properly for shelter use, so that they can contract an agency to provide shelter service here. Without the location, the government will never, that contract will never get finalized. It would just go away.
And then my last question through the chair to Sue then. I'm making an assumption that based on what's being talked about here, the site has already been identified in terms of 37th Avenue or whatever it is. What needs to take place? Can we zone that temporarily, or do we zone it permanently?
Through the chair to Councillor Nielsen, we don't need to zone it. It's a road allowance. So there is no designated zone for that area if we keep them on that road allowance. So that's why that site was chosen originally and presented to council, because it's completely within your control. And then again, this is temporary until reports can come back and other decisions can be made by council.
Thank you.
Paul, through the chair. These utilities that need to be put in, are these temporary? I mean, because this is a temporary shelter. Are these permanent? Are we looking at generators, or are we looking at actually putting in power? Are we?
Yeah, through the mayor to Councillor Billingsley, Kathy and I spoke about this earlier today, so I'll just ask her to respond.
Through the mayor to Councillor Billingsley. Sorry, can you just repeat the question that you just asked?
Absolutely. So this is a temporary shelter. So are the utilities being put in, are these temporary utilities? In other words, is it going to be generators and is it going to be propane heat as opposed to actually digging and running lines and making it almost permanent
Okay.
when you're putting it onto a road?
Right. At this point, we haven't looked at the gas or the power of what that would look like. We're looking at water and wastewater infrastructure at this point. Those are, I guess, for municipal services that we would be offering. So that at this point, if they were temporary, we run the risk of freezing. So we have to look at our different options and where the trailers will be located.
Sorry, just for clarification. So the extra 150,000 is not for power and not for heat then? That's, you're talking, this is just water and wastewater then?
Through the chair to Councillor Billingsley, when we originally did the estimate, the connections to the sanitary and the water came in at $112,000, and the remainder of it was whether or not we had, depending on the trailers, it's likely going to be propane. That also is part of the operating budget between AHS and the service provider. They're able to cover those sorts of things. And then power, there is power out there, but the other option was to have a power station brought on site. And so we're still sourcing some of those pieces, but there is money in that original estimate to cover at least to get it started.
Thank you.
Councillor Elliott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Paul, I have a few questions. Does the location have to be in Wetaskiwin for this grant?
Through the mayor to Councillor Elliott, which is the first time I've said that, so thank you. I don't have a direct answer for you, but in my conversations with the government of Alberta and the government has been speaking to all relevant agencies, so RCMP, AHS, other community providers here, just to get a better sense of the need. They have told us that Wetaskiwin is in dire need of an emergency shelter this winter. I know that there has been other conversations kind of outside the community or transporting to and from, and those are conversations that we are aware of that have happened. If this doesn't happen, if something doesn't happen within our community, then we would have to look at other options. But to my knowledge, the GOA has not told us, anyways, that they are support of funding another option outside of our community.
I just have a few other questions, Mr. Chair. If more than 20 people show up, as we had once the open door happened here, and you said the limit will be 20 people, then what happens to those people who are more than?
Through the mayor to Councillor Elliott. So I think it would be treated like any other overnight shelter in communities such as Leduc or Edmonton, that if the shelter is full for the evening, that which would mean they don't have any more than 20 beds available, that between the shelter provider or the shelter agency and other community support providers and perhaps even the RCMP to figure out where those other individuals are going to go. If that means transporting to the shelter in another community, I know that is already happening. But if the shelter does not have any room, then the agency wouldn't be asked to, squeeze more people in. It would be about what can we do with that individual, given that's not a space to sleep this evening, and look for other solutions, including transporting to and from other shelters in Alberta.
Would these facilities have laundry and showers and that?
to the mayor, to Councillor Elliott. Those are going to be more conversations that we have with the team that needs to plan for the encampment. And we would like to include the shelter agency as part of those discussions to better understand exactly what their business requirements are. And so at this point in time, we haven't had those conversations, although I do know that both laundry service and showers are in dire need. And so I would assume it would be something that we would have a conversation on. Whether or not we have the budget for it is another question.
Okay. And so motion 2 is asking for $300,000, $150,000 of which is coming from the city for a temporary shelter. And then we're going to be paying $12,000 or $25,000 a month for security on top of all of that.
Through the mayor to Councillor Elliott. So I think the $25,000 a month was if we couldn't find an agency and we had to rely on a private security company to come in and be said agency, then you're looking at something like $25,000 a month for 24/7 private security on on-site access. I would force based off the budget that we've had for spending for private security for both in and around the civic building as well as over by the encampment currently, it would be significantly less for private security. I don't believe it would be $25,000 a month.
So at this point, the city has budgeted $12,000 a month until March for security. Correct? That's what I read.
Yeah, so what's through the mayor to Councillor Elliott. So what's been approved by council for private security in that area is $12,000 a month until the end of March.
And the city is getting 10 extra RCMP that we're supposed to be looking after that. We have 3 or 4 CPOs, I'm not sure which. And then we're paying security over and above that.
Through the mayor to Councillor Elliott, yes, the private security is providing on site. There are eyes and ears 20 while they're on the site. So I believe they're operating from 12 midnight to 8 a.m. every day currently. So while they're operating during those timelines, they are our eyes and ears on site versus RCMP and bylaw officers have to be generally phoned unless they just happen to stumble upon an incident in pursuit.
And this area has to be fenced?
Through the mayor to Councillor Elliott, based off the motion on September 13th, the motion included fenced an fenced encampment.
Thank you very much, Paul. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
You're welcome. Thank you. The fencing component of it was to ensure safety for the vulnerable population as well. There were some individuals taking advantage of the situation and had access to, so if we were limiting access to whether it was a shelter or the warming shelter that we had set up there, we were able then to protect the vulnerable and those experiencing homelessness as well as, so it wasn't just to set up a fence compound. And
Although that's being misinterpreted by the population saying that we're kind of putting them in jail.
yeah, I've had conversations with people who are staying at the encampment right now, and I had explained that to them as well. They had expressed to me the concerns that they had about their safety because people were driving into the encampment, harassing them, shouting all kinds of obscenities and everything else like that. So I had made that clear to the people that were at the encampment. I had gone out there and spoke with them a few weeks ago. So while I'm sure that on the outside, that's probably what it could look like, but the purpose of the fence for the compound was for their safety. So I can appreciate that.
Thank you.
And mine's more so a comment and kind of a disappointment than anything else is that if the GOA sees we're in dire need of these amenities, why are we still looking for funding? And if we've been criticized in what we're able to supply to the vulnerable and those experiencing homelessness, why are we still trying to find those amenities for our homeless and through the vulnerable population? So don't get me wrong, I completely appreciate the work that is going into this and things that are happening now. I don't appreciate the criticism that the city has faced while we're trying to do all that we can. And while we don't have a minister of mental health and addictions and we don't have a minister of housing, and all the other agencies that are being involved with this, maybe a little more partnership and a little less criticizing from the GOA. Councilor Nielsen.
My questions were asked. Thank you.
Councillor Aberlin.
Through the chair to Paul, and mine's more of a clarification. When they were talking about the GOA and the mustard seed agreement for an overnight shelter only, so does that put more onus because previous council had requested a 24-hour spot?
Through the mayor to Councillor Aberley, also first time I've said that, so welcome. And I know everybody else here, so that will be the last time I say that. There was discussion on a 24/7. One of the interesting things from this administrator's perspective is how expensive a 24/7 is to run, as well as in early conversations with the mustard seed, trying to staff one becomes very difficult as well. In that there's, I think for a 24/7, like 40 to 50 staff members required. And so the GOA, maybe one more comment before I get into the GOA's perspective, is that our community still doesn't have a really good sense of what our homeless situation looks like, how many vulnerable we have in our city at any one given point in time. So understanding that the numbers that were coming out of the encampment were everything from 75 to 22 as of last Friday morning. The GOA is, and this is what we've been told, is that they'd like to start small, assess what the need is here. And then if they need to reassess, they can do that down the line. But at this point in time, the agreement is for 20 beds for a winter overnight only.
And just sort of, again, it would be up to then who decides an encampment that if we build a fenced encampment, that the doors are closed at say 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. With that, that's my next question is, would it be available to be open, or are we potentially spending $300,000 for only overnight?
Yeah, through the mayor or Councillor Aberley, is that the current agreement, again, it's only a winter overnight. I'm not exactly sure on the shelter agency's protocol as to, closing time and opening time and exactly how that works, because we haven't got into the conversation around protocol just yet. But the current investment for a location at the 37th A Avenue location would be to fund only a winter overnight for 20 beds at this point in time.
Thank you.
Watts.
Through the chair to Paul. So the difference between the two motions then is urgency, right? Like the $300,000 is so that then we can expedite the process, or?
Yeah, through the mayor to Councillor Blatz. Just to clarify on the motions, it's the first one is we know we have $150,000 committed from RDN. We have that letter in my inbox as of 6 p.m. this evening. So we have the money right now to start the development. And the reason why we're asking for a formal motion for that is that last time on September 13th, if you recall, when that motion was made, there was a lot of discussion, even though it didn't necessarily make its way into the motion, about not starting any of this work until funding was received. Now, the September 13th motion, the way I was reading it this morning, says, well, I don't know that I need another motion, but in talking with Sue and our senior team, we would just like clarification that you're okay to proceed. We've received some funding. We'll only start development up to that amount that we have, the $150,000, and the rest of it will be dependent upon other grant funding, which we do believe is available through RDN, the Musqueam Cree Tribal Council, as well as perhaps the government of Alberta. Motion number 2 says, no, we want to get moving with all of it right now because time is of the essence. We know that trailers are going to take some time. With $150,000 that we currently have, our best bet is that we would most likely start working on the underground utilities since that work right away, and that trailers are easy to hook up eventually. But trailers will take some time to search and procure. The downside with number 2 is the funding is not 100% received yet. We still only have 150,000. Although administration is aware of other funding, it won't necessarily mean we are going to get it. And I can't promise that that's going to happen, right? So it's just seeing what appetite council has, given the urgency of the situation.
And would you say then that it would be easier to obtain the funding if we decide to go through the $300,000 route? Because we would have a location and an agency on board, and then from there we can leverage that in order to get more funding?
Through the mayor to Councillor Blatz, the agency contract between, my understanding is the GOA and the mustard seed contract, or that agreement won't be in place until we actually have a location where they can move in and start providing, right? So the $300,000, even if you were to approve that, we would still have to wait for everything to be locked and loaded. And then we could say, okay, government, okay, mustard seed, it's ready. And then they could plan to start moving in. A lot of this stuff I think could be in parallel. I'm not sure I answered your question. Sorry.
No, you did.
Did I? Okay,
Thank
thank you.
You didn't ask her, you didn't answer her question for me. Councillor Lonsdale.
Thank you. Through the chair to Paul, and I think mine's a lot like Gabrielle's. If we showed the willingness for motion number 2, in working with the grants we're waiting for, and this might be a little bit of an unfair question, but if we show that willingness to do that, do you believe it may enhance our opportunities or speed up things by showing we're behind this and we're going to go forward?
And that's the part through the mayor to Councillor Lonsdale. That's the part that I missed. Sorry about that. I'll give you my personal opinion, and I'll look to the city manager who's got 30 years more experience than I do, but I don't believe that it's going to matter. The urgency of the situation here in Wetaskiwin is very well documented, and the entire government and agencies, including AHS, they know about it. In our conversations with the Massachusetts Cree Tribal Council, they're also aware of our situation. So I don't know that us, a council approving the $300,000 is going to make it more likely that we're going to get other funding. I think the need and the dire straits of the need, the urgency of it is what will help get us there. In a perfect world, everything would have been found ahead of time and then we would proceed, but it's not a perfect world. So
thank you.
Councillor Nielsen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through the chair to Paul. So if I were to put this on a little chart, I would say federal money, 150,000. Municipal money with option 2, 150,000. Provincial commitment to be determined. And I guess, and my anxiety or my frustration is not directed at yourself, because as others have said, we applaud the work that staff have done. But everybody recognizes what a dire strait we happen to be in. But the expectation is that the feds and the municipal tax base will solve the problem, and perhaps, and I use the word perhaps, the provincial government will step in when the first 300,000 has been spent. My concern is that we spend 300,000, we have snow on the ground and negative temperatures, and the government is going to procrastinate a little bit longer. So the pressure gets turned back to this group of people. Well, you've already got 300,000 into it. And, you know, for a mere another $100,000, we can actually get this thing off the ground. And then it would read federal government 150, municipal government 250, provincial government still contemplating their commitment to a dire situation in our community. And to think that we do not have ministers of Indigenous affairs, that we do not have ministers of mental health and addictions, and ministers of housing in our municipality. I think the provincial government, I feel like the provincial government is putting us over a barrel and say, solve the problem and roll the dice and see how much you might get from us down the road. And that scares the bejeebers out of me. So there's my soliloquy. So my question is, in the event that this council votes for motion number one, $150,000 only, where does that leave this project going forward?
Through the mayor to Councillor Nielsen. So in the event that we were only to receive $150,000 of funding from RDN and no other grant funding came in, is how I'm reading your question. Like it would just be $150,000 total. Can I just ask for that clarification?
My point being is if this council does not approve 150,000, sorry, 300,000, of which 150 would be coming back through rural development. So there's $150,000 we know is coming in, and that's where we leave it. Motion number one, we do not commit $150,000. Where does that leave this project?
Thank you for the clarification. Through the mayor to Councillor Nielsen. In the event that motion one is approved this evening, we will proceed as fast as we can. Working with that subgroup, as I mentioned before, shelter provider, our funders in the GOA and RDN, as well as Kathy's staff and my staff, to better understand the best way forward. Based off some very preliminary conversations with Ms. Lewin, we believe that moving forward on the utilities would be our best course of action. We have $150,000. So the next question becomes, how creative can we get? How efficient are we at using those funds? In the meantime, while that 150,000, we're making plans to spend that $150,000. We're still working with the Massachusetts Cree Tribal Council to find additional funding. We're working with RDN now that we've identified a piece of land to look for additional funding. There is still a chance that we are going to receive more grant funding. And once that grant funding was received, then we would come back to council with a status update of where we're at. Here's the work that has been done. And similar to this evening, it'd be a similar motion to number one in that we have received this amount of grant funding committed to the city of Wetaskiwin. Therefore, we would like to spend it to proceed with trailer purchase or what have you, so that we can fulfill council's motion on September the 13th.
Thank you. And again, my thanks for the work you've done. Our thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through the mayor to all of council, I just want to make a couple of suggestions here. So first of all, clarification. The whole reason that I asked Paul to bring forward motion one is because it's going to take them a few minutes to get the money to us, and we don't have approval to spend money right now. So we do need council's approval to do that. And then it'll obviously be recovered when the grant money comes in. The other suggestion that I have is council could approve motion one, and then administration will continue to work with the mayor in lobbying efforts and other orders of government and agencies. And we could call a special council meeting if and when we know there's more money coming, and get that other 150,000 approved through council, if that helps. Because I understand the apprehension of committing another 150,000 without guaranteed money coming in on that.
I'd like to make a motion, please. I think I do. I move the city council directs administration to front end $150,000 funded from the contingency reserve to proceed with the development of a fence trailer cabin on 37A Avenue on the road allowance upon receipt of a letter of commitment from the Rural Development Network.
For clarification, we've received that letter.
Yeah.
Okay. Discussion. Ready for the question? Those in favor? Carried unanimously. Councillor Nielsen.
I understand Sue's response to the question about what happens if we just move number one. And that's continue working with. But I also don't want the GOA to perceive this as a lack of commitment to the vulnerable population. Nor do I want Cree Tribal Council to see this as a lack of commitment from the city. I think it's really important that there's some kind of statement that gets made in this that reflects our concern for the vulnerable population and reflects loudly we need more partners with skin in the game to make this happen. And we are very concerned that without more partners with skin in the game, we may not be able to meet the needs of our vulnerable population. And I don't know how we communicate that loudly enough or strongly enough. But I worry that without communicating that statement, we leave the impression that we're not overly concerned. And that worries me as well. So off my soapbox one more time.
Councillor Elliott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There's also the cost of the land involved as well, Councillor Nielsen. And I don't know what the land is worth, but if we had to go out and purchase something like that, it would have cost us a fair chunk of change. So I think we have a lot of skin in the game, and we have shown that we are trying to look out for our vulnerable population. I don't like talking with the mask on, but anyway. But I think we've shown that. I think the mayor has shown that since way back when. So this has been ongoing. I'll stop there.
I don't think we need to plead our case on what we have or haven't done in terms of the support for our vulnerable population and those experiencing homelessness. I think our efforts and our work, both politically and administratively, speaks for itself. I have no problem standing behind my work or behind the work of council or behind the work of administration to say that we are absolutely on board and looking for solutions. So if anybody ever wants to question that of the city of Wetaskiwin, then I would point them in the direction of everything that's gone on since February of 2019. And with that, I look for a motion to adjourn. Councillor Blatz. Those in favor? Carried.
For that one, all of them.
I have a piece of paper for council to sign, please. Come and visit me in my office.